finally here. You finally arrived. You've at last found the one place which holds the answers to the questions of the ages. You're excited. Your heart palpitates. Is it real? Can it be true? You're understandably hesitant, yet determinedly hopeful. That is good. Your faith in such matters will be rewarded. You'll not find pat and cliched answers here. No! Here is a place of clarity, of definition, of explanation, of truth. Here combines science and religion, removes tradition and replaces it with fact. Here the universe is holographic, yet tangible, ethereal, yet substantive. Here is a place where time is understood as atemporal. Here there is harmony amidst chaos. Here is where the darkened glass is finally cleared. Here is where you'll find the answers to all the unanswered questions which stretch across the cosmos.
And you are across the cosmos for the next hour. I am Chase Rockwell, and I am your host. I am joined once again in studio by my co-hosts,
Mark Wilson
and Lou Rogers.
And we've got a special guest in studio today. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, starting with your name?
I'm Jesse Wilson, and I teach at University of the Nations in Kona, Hawaii. And so we just go through the Bible and teach on the Bible, and that's kind of my profession right now.
You want to elaborate on that just a little bit?
Okay. So it's an organization. It's a missions organization, and it's a 9-month school where we study through all 66 books of the Bible. And then at the end of the school, we send a team out, usually to China or to Thailand, to do missions work and to teach the Bible in those places.
Now, why Hawaii? I mean, why not Thule, Greenland, for example?
Okay, well, the organization's called Youth with a Mission, and it started in Kona, Hawaii. And the reason why is because the location that it is it's easy to go out into the Asian, into Australia, or we can come into the United States, or it's centrally located in a good location.
For the Pacific Rim?
Yeah.
All right. I'm just checking. I wanted to make sure it wasn't because of the coconuts and the pina coladas and the beach babes and the surfing.
Yeah, no, it's actually,
is that any sort of a draw at all?
No, actually, I would rather do it somewhere else.
Like Thule, Greenland?
Yes.
You're in Thule, Greenland? All right. The war on drugs is our topic today on Across the Cosmos. Now, I'm going to take a position which I want the listening audience to know right from the outset in the spirit of transparency. It isn't a popular position from the standpoint of the federal or state governments, but it is a position that is gaining in popularity amongst the people. Thus, the show today is going to upset many who believe that we must, as a country, as a people, do our utmost to stem the flow of illegal drugs into the country in efforts to keep them from, especially our children, but may hold positions of power. The prevailing thought is that these drugs are bad and that their use amongst the populace will lead to a further decay of our society. Ironically, when one looks at the decay of our society since the inception of the quote-unquote war on drugs, it would be legitimate to ask whether we haven't been lied to by our leaders as to the actual objective of this war. While I would most definitely agree that drug use is not a good thing for our society, I would also contend that the decided upon cure by our leadership has demonstrated itself to be vastly more harmful to our society than the defined disease. I would liken this particular cure to that of amputating the leg of a patient in order to mend a broken ankle. Too much hyperbole, you say? Well, I don't quite see it that way, but let me explain. The United States' current war on drugs began with the so-named declaration by President Richard M. Nixon in June of 1971. Through executive fiat, Nixon increased the size and presence of federal drug control agencies and pushed through measures such as mandatory sentencing and no-knock warrants. As part of this war, Nixon temporarily placed marijuana in Schedule I classification, the most restrictive category of drugs, as part of the Controlled Substance Act, or the CSA, which was implemented in 1970. This is the federal U.S. drug policy under which the manufacture, importation, possession, use, and distribution of certain substances is regulated. It was passed by the 91st United States Congress as Title II of the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970 and signed into law by President Richard M. Nixon. The act also served as the national implementing legislation for the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. The classification of marijuana was set pending review by a commission appointed by Richard Nixon, which was led by Republican Pennsylvania Governor Raymond Schaefer. In 1972, the commission unanimously recommended decriminalization of the possession and distribution of marijuana for personal use. In other words, marijuana was to be removed from the listing as a Schedule I narcotic as outlined by the CSA. Nixon ignored the report and rejected its recommendations outright. So let us look a little bit more closely at the marijuana situation for just a moment. From 2001 to 2010, law enforcement nationwide made more than 8.2 million marijuana arrests. Almost 9 in 10 were for mere possession alone, not distribution, just possession. In 2011, there were more arrests for marijuana possession than for all violent crimes put together. Given these statistics, can one really assert that the utilization of our law enforcement resources are well served in the pursuit of such convictions for non-violent marijuana users? And that really is the point of today's show. In the end, we, the people, have to ask ourselves whether such is to the betterment or the detriment of our society. When one assesses the effectiveness of this war over the last 44 years since its inception, one can clearly see that despite the monetary expense and size of the assault launched by the United States, very little has been done to eradicate these drugs or dilute their usage. In fact, it can be argued that drug use has soared to all-time highs during this period of time. The statistics bear this claim out quite clearly to anyone bothering to look. While the war on drugs has been a monumental failure, in my opinion, what has been accomplished, and with spectacular results, cannot be ignored. Our society is now suffering as a result of the complete and absolute dismantling of 2 generations of families, with a third now in jeopardy, over the draconian sentences handed down to people as part of this assault. Can a country which insists that its drug enforcement actions are being implemented for the betterment of society really continue to assert such a claim in the complete absence of any associated evidence? Evidently it can, with the proper leadership continuing to be put into power by an apathetic and ignorant public, that is. As a bit of irony, I will point out that during the same period of time that the war on drugs has been waged, pharmaceutical companies have grown ever larger. In fiscal year 2014 alone, pharmaceutical companies recorded combined sales of over $85 billion with a B dollars. The combined total compensation for the CEOs of 11 companies worldwide comes to $1.57 billion, again with a B. That works out to a personal compensation of $142 million per pharmaceutical CEO. While there is no doubt that a portion of those sales are for drugs which are regarded as a necessity, chemotherapy, for example. But there is an increasing growing number of people who are using a wide variety of quote-unquote legal drugs which deal with depression and pain. These are the drugs that are the pharmaceutical companies' bread and butter. Here are a few startling statistics. 1. According to the New York Times, more than 30 million Americans are currently taking antidepressants. 2. The rate of antidepressant use among middle-aged women is far higher than for the population as a whole. Today, 1 out of every 4 women in their 40s and 50s is taking an antidepressant medication. 3. Americans account for about 5% of the global population, but we buy more than 50% of the pharmaceutical drugs. 4. Americans also consume a whopping 80% of all prescription painkillers. 5. Doctors in the United States write 259 million prescriptions for painkillers each year. These prescription painkillers are some of the most addictive legal drugs produced. 6. Overall, pharmaceutical drug use in America is at an all-time high. According to a study conducted by the Mayo Clinic, nearly 70% of all Americans are on at least one prescription drug, and 20% of all Americans are on at least 5 prescription drugs. 7. According to the CDC, approximately 9 out of every 10 Americans that are at least 60 years old or older say that they have taken at least one prescription drug within the last month. 8. In 2010, the average teen in the United States was taking 1.2 central nervous system drugs. Now, these are the classification of drugs which are used to treat conditions such as ADHD and depression. 9. In the United States today, prescription painkillers kill more Americans than heroin and cocaine combined. Now, as we look more closely at the war on drugs, we can see clearly how it is actually being used to build careers and make money for a few rather than control the flow of illegal drugs and help our society as a whole. Supposed respectable and legitimate companies are fighting for turf against the independent contractors and with the backing of the United States government, destroying lives in the process. Here, I cite for you an egregious case that explains exactly what I mean. In 2011, undercover police officers posed to students in 3 Florida high schools. These officers behaved as normal teenagers would, going to classes, making Facebook connections, and flirting with the other students to allay any suspicion as to their true identity. One 18-year-old honor student at Park Vista Community High School in Palm Beach, Florida, named Justin LeBoy, fell in love with one of these undercover officers, who eventually busted him. The attractive 25-year-old female officer spent weekends with the teenager, and the two acted as any crushing youngsters would, sharing stories, texting, flirting. They were building a relationship, and Justin just wanted to make his new girl happy. Eventually, the undercover cop told Justin how much he loved weed and begged him for a connection. Justin relented, even though he himself did not smoke. He refused the $25 his crush had tried to give him for the purchase of the weed and told her instead that the pot was a gift. When the sting operation eventually came down, police arrested Justin along with 31 other students and charged him and the others with distribution. LeBoy was eventually convicted and now has a felony record which prevented him from joining the military, as he had intended to do once he had graduated from high school. The case was not considered entrapment because LeBoy could have declined the undercover officer's request. The case gained national attention due in large measure to LeBoy's ordeal. An 18-year-old high school student, far from an underworld drug dealer or producer, had had his life destroyed by the very system which was supposed to protect him. This is just one case amidst thousands. There are dozens of websites and advocacy groups which speak to the utter devastation this so-called war on drugs has wrought upon the citizens of the United States. The contrast between established legal drug dealing and so-called illegal drug dealing is clear. If you pay out to the right people in positions of power and authority, you can peddle as many drugs to as many people as you desire. However, if you decide to sidestep the established avenues, you are branded a criminal and an enemy of the state. You will find your life is taken away, if not literally, then in every other aspect which afford one's the rights to pursue life, liberty, and happiness as outlined by our United States Constitution. You become a second-class citizen by the stroke of an extraordinarily biased pen. Is our society made better by such destruction of its citizens? It can be argued, and credibly, that the closing of our borders to ensure drug trafficking is stemmed would be the first best approach if, in fact, the DEA and the United States government were really interested in stemming the flow and usage of illegal drugs. When one steps back and surveys the scene, however, it becomes startlingly clear that our government has a completely different objective in mind and is employing the appropriate tactics to achieve their goal. So what is that goal? From the available evidence, it would seem that the goal is to create a class of people with truncated constitutional rights who will eventually be dependent upon the government. In the United States of America, a felony record remains with the individual for life. A felony strips the individual of many of their constitutional rights. For example, a felon must petition the government for the right to vote and the right to own a firearm. The government can refuse both requests out of hand, and often does. A felon is prohibited from holding government jobs. Additionally, a felon will find obtaining gainful employment in the private sector nearly impossible, as prospective employers will only see that they are a felon without knowing all of the details. Does our government take the effect of their actions towards the citizens of this country into account when they go after the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit, which comprise most of these drug arrests? Do they realize that they are creating a mass of second-class citizens without really addressing the underlying problem? Well, yes, they do. But they will also simply state that they are, quote-unquote, doing their jobs. In an interview with the UK Guardian on July 9, 2015, New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton said, quote, "It's a challenge to find hireable blacks for the force because so many African American men have been arrested." The primary arrests of these African American men, statistically speaking, are for nonviolent drug crimes. This is the real legacy of the war on drugs, the destruction of citizens with no solution. The question we, as citizens, should be asking ourselves at this point is, why are we allowing it to happen? Why are we as citizens so ignorant, so malleable, so easily led astray by politicians climbing a personal career ladder? Our leadership is still as hypocritical respecting drugs as they were towards alcohol during the Prohibition era. Drug use amongst our elected officials is rampant, but they insist that they are not on par with the marijuana user or the corner street crack cocaine abuser, because they have a doctor's prescription. They use the system they built and ruled to engage in behavior the average citizen would be branded a felon and imprisoned for doing. We as citizens sit back, and we call that justice. So what is the solution? Should we just legalize drugs completely and deal with the consequences no matter what they may be? Well, sadly, since we have so badly mishandled the problem with drug use in our country for so many years, such an option is not tenable. However, neither is the present state of incarceration of our citizens. The answer to this present mire is to begin to foster a sense of personal responsibility along with a viable avenue for restoration. The first step in this should be to close our borders to cut off the supply of drugs immediately. Branding high school students as felons may look good on an arresting officer's record or a DA's resume, but it does little to solve the problem. Closing the back doors does. Our borders should be closed, and now. Not another drug arrest or conviction should be allowed until our federal government does its primary, and listen to me carefully, our primary constitutional duty, which is to protect the sovereignty of this republic. Not one more drug conviction should stand until the federal government does its constitutional duty. Additionally, unless and until we decide as a people that drug addictions have to be dealt with in a humane and compassionate manner and not simply allow for the destruction of others' lives, this problem will continue to get worse. The war on drugs is a misnomer because of its resultant outcome. What the war on drugs really is a war on people, and it is an obscenity. I now turn this over to my esteemed co-hosts for their opinions.
Well, Chase, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head on quite a few of the issues. One of the things I can say is that my family has seen the pains of drug abuse.
Yes.
As those of the table here well know the history of my family. And my personal view is rather simple. The war on drugs does not work.
So why do we have it?
My personal view is I believe Nixon started with probably mostly good intent.
I'll take issue with you on that, but go ahead.
But But as probably the best president we have had in modern era said, and that would be quoting Ronald Reagan, no government, or the closest we will see to eternal life in this world is a government program. We have developed the DEA, the FBI, the ATF. All these government entities will lose tremendous amounts of funding when we decide we're not going to wage a war on drugs and treat it like a health problem instead of a legal problem.
All right. Yeah, I understand that. I understand that essentially, and I can go far and more into this. As we incarcerate more people, there's the need for a larger prison structure.
And that's becoming more and more privatized. That's big business now.
It's big business, whether it's private or public, quite
Exactly.
frankly, because the Corrections Department, Bureau of Prisons, oversees a lot of this, at least on the federal level. The Bureau of Prisons is massive, and it's a department-level position as the director of the Bureau of Prisons. And there's a tremendous amount of money that is poured into this with the upgrade of prisons, incarceration. But then you have this whole associated structure.
It's like trying to fill a 5-gallon bucket with a 2-inch hole at the bottom. You can fill it up, but it just keeps pouring out.
Well,
it's a never-stop program.
Yeah, but I don't believe it's designed to be. I believe that what's happened is that in Oklahoma, they struck oil way back when.
Yes, they did.
Right around the turn of the 19th century to the 20th. And wildcatters poured in there. J. Paul Getty's father made his fortune there, as did, a lot of people. And I'm drawing a blank now, one of the other famous oil people. Anyway, what happened is not only did you have people going in there prospecting for oil, trying their luck, but you had all these associated businesses that sprang up because of the oil strikes. And towns were built.
Yes. California Gold Rush is similar.
Exactly the same thing. When you make laws that suddenly incarcerate such a large portion of the populace, all of a sudden you've got all these little associated businesses that spring up around the nucleus.
Exactly.
And that is what I see happening with the criminal justice system on the track that it is now. Not only are we creating generations of felons that remain felons for life, but during that time where they're either in prison or on paper, which is parole or supervised release, there's a tremendously huge associated businesses, culture that feed off of that. And we're taking a pound. It's almost like we're flesh peddlers on a federal level.
I believe we are in much of the ways. I don't believe we're solving the problem. Look, it's been going on almost 50 years, and we've declared war on poverty.
Please don't even get me started.
I'm using this as an example.
God.
We declared war on poverty about 75 years ago when the percentage of the population that was in poverty was around 20%. Well, after 75 years in the war on poverty, we have a population of about 25% now that are under the poverty level. So the only thing that's happened is it's gone up. The government has declared war on drugs. We have drug use. When I was a young child in the 70s, there were some teenagers and hippies doing it, but the majority of the people still didn't do it. By the time I was in high school, if you weren't smoking pot, we'd look at you like, what the hell is wrong with you?
All right.
So, does it work? Does it prevent children from use? It doesn't. It's a failed idea. And if you want to do it, we need to come up with something different.
Well, personally, like looking at kind of this whole war on drugs, living in LA for a while, I remember being a white person driving around LA. We would be smoking blunts out of our car.
Wait. You're not white now?
Define a blunt.
Yes,
A blunt is a.
We're not all kiddies here.
It's a rolled up. It's marijuana rolled up into a large, kind of like a cigar. It's like a thin cigar.
Now, why don't you say what it is? We go down to the store and we buy Swisher Sweets.
Oh, no. We got the wraps. we didn't do the ghetto Swisher Sweets there.
Bless America.
And they had dispensaries in Los Angeles, and my buddy had a medical card, and we would just go down to the dispensary. And
Hey, man!
But we would drive around, and we would be smoking out of our car, and because I knew that, because there would be times when I got pulled over when I wasted and high.
So it's like a Cheech and Chong movie.
The cop would look at me, he'd see that I was white, and be like, all right, go on. It happened many times. There was a time when we were driving down, speeding down this road that was kind of blowing through red lights. It was like 35 miles an hour. We're going about 70 miles an hour. We're drinking, we're smoking. We get pulled over. And I'm like, oh, I just live right down there. The cop looks at me, looks at everybody in the car. He's like, all right, go ahead. And, and because in Los Angeles, if you're white, you can literally get away with almost anything. Especially if you're white, and my buddy had a Mercedes, and we would dress in suits, so we looked like we were upper class. They don't touch the upper class. They don't want to touch the upper class.
So suddenly the entire show has taken a left turn into racial territory.
No. It's not about racial. What it's about is it's about kind of keeping that separation between the lower class and the upper class. The lower class are the ones that get affected more by this war on drugs rather than the upper class.
Of that, I have no doubt. The statistics bear that out.
I'm going to jump in. I am of the opinion that if marijuana, pot to those of you that might know it by the street name, was being used by upper class white people, it would be legal. And if Viagra was being used by the majority of the low income, young age people, it would be illegal. It is simply a matter of who has the money and what drugs they want to use.
Oh, upper. Well, you look at like cocaine. Well,
Yeah,
cocaine's
that's what I was
illegal,
about
but that's
to-
an upper class drug. I mean, that's
Yeah. Well, when I was in school, everyone did cocaine, and you were known by the quality of your cocaine that you had.
Yeah.
If you had stepped on cocaine, you were like, okay, ghetto boy.
Yeah, I when I lived in LA, I did cocaine as well, and like you'd hang around these people that I remember going to mansion parties. We drive up to this mansion, and you would walk around, and people are snorting cocaine, they're smoking weed, and all sorts of stuff. So it's not that the upper class doesn't do this stuff; they do it. They just don't get touched. They know that they can do it without being touched. It's actually legal for them.
All right, that's a provocative statement that it's legal for them, because now you're impugning all of law enforcement who are seeing crimes going on. Now, to be clear, I do understand that there is a disparity, and this disparity was addressed quite clearly in that lower income individuals who were using a derivative of cocaine, which was crack,
Yeah.
Yes.
and it was on the federal sentencing guidelines harsher than cocaine, though cocaine was purer. And the reason ostensibly was because it was more ubiquitous than cocaine.
Well, crack is a condensed form of cocaine, so its amount of use has a higher effect on the body.
It's always cut,
It's cut with.
I agree,
baking
it's cut.
soda, baking powder.
if you're lucky.
Yeah, I mean that's
Right.
They'll cut it
There's
with
a-
plaster of Paris.
They used to cut it with baby laxative.
Yeah.
There's another consideration, because this is such a huge topic. When you say drugs and you try and lump them all together, you have to isolate which drugs are not really that bad at all. And sometimes medicinally, they're actually good for you. You can compare something like marijuana to Vicodin. Vicodin is far more powerful a drug. It's legal. All you need is
it's
prescription.
legal with
And
the
far more
prescription.
addictive.
Whereas
Oh, yeah.
marijuana is not. It's been classified as a bad drug, and if you take it, you're a bad person.
Well, here's the deal, though. When the DEA looks at the classifications of narcotics and marijuana is stuck up there right next to morphine, that's what they've got to follow. Like the Nazis, like the good Nazis did in World War II,
Sure.
after being confronted with slaughtering 6 million Jews. Well, we're just doing our job.
Right. Now, what we have to do is just let another perspective inside at this moment. I did prison ministry for about 5 years, both at Shelton and then down here locally. And there's another aspect to drugs that is quite deadly for society, and that is there's heroin, black tar heroin on the streets, which is really cheap. There's meth, which is on the streets and really cheap. And it changes people's lives, destroys marriages, destroys businesses, makes a worker not a good worker or a thief. It creates an environment in which the person will do anything to get their next hit, and they'll scam, they'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal to get the money for their next hit, and they no longer become that citizen who's working, putting away money, saving, doing things what we would call the proper way. But they are not making a better life for themselves. They're destroying themselves, their family. They're incarcerated. And it's been shown that if you incarcerate people who are like that, the drying out period in jail has actually been very beneficial for them.
Agreed, but I don't believe that you need to put them in jail and brand them a felon to do so. What you're talking about is the effects of rehabilitation. Well,
for instance, I've known several individuals that I can actually name that when they first came into jail, it takes, I've observed this, it takes a good 6 months for them to become who they really are again.
Yes. I would concur.
It's amazing how their personality takes so long to change back, but it does. So if they were left out on the streets, they have no choice but to follow that base instinct and steal again and steal again and steal again.
As part of my solution to this, I don't recommend just putting them back out on the streets. What I am recommending is that we get rid of this prison culture, this second-class citizen mindset that we have adopted en masse, and start looking at putting our attentions more towards rehabilitation. Well, so if they need 6 months to dry out, give them 6 months to dry out.
And there's a fiscal problem with that?
No, there's not.
But let me share this with you. Most of the time, the people on those harder drugs, or those more addictive drugs, aren't there simply because they use. We as a nation have changed radically on that basis. It was back in the 1970s, if you were caught, I never did smoke, never even tried it, but I had friends, if you were caught with, I think they called them a lid? A lid?
There's different measures.
That's one of the different street names.
That even in the 1970s, it was changing. There was a movie called Midnight Express that shocked the heck out of everybody, the guy that went to Turkey, and that movie's horrific, by the way. However, the police officers were changing and softening their stance, even though the war on drugs was very high at that time. The casual user would get busted, but they weren't really spending any grueling or hard time. Today, they're not really after that type of a user. What's in the prisons, what's in the jails, is the people that become literal idiots and zombies, where they do stupid things. They're driving they're driving high, as you said, and they're crashing into people, and they have no insurance. What do? You don't just simply say, okay, let's set you aside and dry you out. That's part of it, but they just created a huge problem for other people. They did damage.
No, I'm not.
What about the guy who shoots somebody? Because he thinks I know a guy that literally shot somebody because he thought he was in the middle of a video game. I know another guy who tried to run down a police officer, also thinking he was in the middle of a video game, and the police shot him. So you've got prisons that are filled with not just the casual users, but they're filled with the users who are so addicted to their drug that they steal. They do horrific things to get their drug money.
That's all true, Mark, but I also know or knew people, most of them are probably dead by now, that spent 10 years in Nevada corrections for one joint.
That's stupid.
10 years of his life.
That's profane.
For one joint.
Whatever judge passed that, no matter what. See, here's something we have to understand. Judges cannot hide behind statutes.
But see, this rolls into the classification of marijuana.
No,
marijuana is classified as absolutely no physical good for medical or any other use, and is therefore classified as the most dangerous drug.
A judge does not know the power they have. They say that they do, and they should know it, but they don't, because their renderings a lot of time affect who they are and their standing as a judge. But justice by a judge can be, they don't just simply look at the statutes and earlier statutes adopted or earlier cases. They have the ability to look at a situation and dismiss a case or hand down a lighter sentence based on that.
And
If-
you know
if
why
you
they
are
don't?
a situation where there is a federal sentencing or state sentencing guideline, you are beholden to that guideline.
Not always.
I said in a case where there are federal or state sentencing guidelines, they are beholden to that.
Right.
They can go to the
Here's the deal.
When the state says you
prosecutor
will
is the one that
minimum
has the
of.
latitude to charge, a particular individual with this, that, or the other thing. Once the charge has been made and has gone to trial or is in for whatever negotiation, a plea, then it enters into the judge's realm. When the prosecutor makes his decision, that's it. Okay? And there was a very famous case where this judge had to sentence this guy who was a three-striker to life in prison. Life in prison because the federal sentencing guidelines would not give him the latitude. He petitioned various congressmen, representatives, senators, and trying to get this thing overturned. But he said in his statements when he sentenced the man, he said, I think this is an obscenity and I wish I didn't have to do it. But I
That is
have
an
no
obscenity.
option. Okay?
But in the case of the guy with the joint serving time, is profane and stupid.
It is.
It was
but
Legion back
what did
after
you-
Nixon first did this.
It's absolutely moronic.
let's go back to how does a judge get to be judge?
That's just as bad as slavery was in the 1800s.
How does a judge
and
get to be a
1700s.
judge?
There's no difference.
Exactly. That's because we are creating a two-tiered society.
There's absolutely no difference. You are right. We take anyone that does recreational drugs and we have made them 3/5 human.
Do you understand
That's
that
horrible.
when you do this to the citizens, and I'm looking at a headline here from the Daily News out of UK. U.S. soldiers accepting cash drugs for Mexican drug cartel contact hits. There is a very powerful drug cartel in the United States right now called the Los Zetas.
At whose fault? Who
And the
caused
Los
that?
Zetas have gotten a foothold in this country because of our immigration, or rather I should say lack of immigration laws. When we have allowed for our border to become porous, when the federal government ignores what is written in the Constitution as one of its primary duties to protect the sovereignty of this country, when that is ignored, okay, and then you instead turn the big guns on the citizens that are here legally, well, these guys are going to come in, I'm talking about the cartel members, what have you, set up shop here, and they're going to start going after people. Now, prisons become a hotbed for this because most of these people incarcerated now, they're nailed for felonies. Their life on the outside effectively has been diminished tremendously. There are options no longer on the table for them. And when you've done that to a person, what else are they going to do? We still have to survive. We still have to eat. We still need to live someplace. So the situation becomes one of survival. And if you can make a ton of money working for these guys, well, hell, you're already destroyed. What more can they do to you? Stick you back into prison? So you start to think differently. Now you're in Mad Max mode.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's all that's left available to you. And that is by design. If anyone has ever read the book, and I know I keep coming back to this, 1984, that will tell you where the elites, the globalists, the lunatics that we elect as our leaders in this country are trying to take us. You don't have a porous border. Allow all this crap in, whether it be the Los Zetos or ISIS, and then start machine gunning your citizens who were born and raised here. That's insane. And because we are apathetic, because we are ignorant, we continue to allow it to happen.
Well,
1966, LSD was made illegal. Prior to 1966, you'd go to any pharmacy and buy it, no questions asked. Overnight, it became an incarceratable offense to have LSD. Overnight. The same was true for marijuana prior to Nixon's CSA. Marijuana back in the 60s was like a parking ticket. There were few people who were ever arrested for it and did any sort of hard time. You paid a fine. It was like being picked up for being drunk. And prior to 1930, not even that. We've had opiates since the founding of this country and before.
Well, that's something I want to get into. Every society throughout history, we can go back to the Greek society during the Bronze Age. They've all had some form of drug abuse issues that their societies had to deal with.
But in the 19th century in
we're
America,
not new.
we understood that there were drug addictions,
There
and
were things
they
that-
were placed in sanitariums or something
Right.
until they dried out or got cured.
We
There was
cleaned
no
them.
criminal attachment
Well,
to it.
Exactly. It's a health issue. It is
So if you
not a
think that this
criminal
is an
issue.
improvement,
No, we have a greater sized country, and I understand that. Our road systems are different today. You're driving vehicles you didn't drive in the 1800s. Just like alcohol abuse, the reason they're so strict nowadays, you have to get a blow and go if you get a DUI, is because you can kill somebody. And I understand that.
they killed somebody then.
Well, alcohol,
Familiar with
a
Carrie
DUI
Nation?
in America is not as intense as in some of the other countries.
Okay. Now, the way it was handled in centuries and millennia past was it would work itself out. If you were a drug user and you didn't show up for work, you got fired. You couldn't maintain your household. You lost your land.
Right.
There's a law of diminishing returns. And sadly, a lot of people were caught up on that, but it was their own fault.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
normal.
That is by their own choice and design.
Right.
I politically tend to fall into the conservative libertarian view. If you are an adult, then who the hell am I to tell you what you can and cannot put into your own body?
Right. When the government steps in, here's the problem we have. If they say that such a person is now a felon, as you said, from this moment on, even after you've served your time according to their statutes,
paid your debt.
your dues, you've paid your debt and your dues. When you walk out, you are now branded a citizen of lower class for the rest of your life.
For the rest of your
Put it
life.
And
this
that's
way.
wrong.
I know for a fact when I was growing up, because I was related to one, that I can remember the police officer looking at him after he got pulled over and said, "Well, convict,"
Right.
because that conviction never goes away.
Right. It's
Even though the man had
prejudicial.
lived out a clean life for 20 years after he had served his time.
Right.
As far as the cop is concerned, you're a convict.
Now, if you get high on meth or crank or PCP and
You're
you
gonna
lay
do
waste
stupid
to a
shit.
business and you hurt somebody or kill somebody or whatever,
Pay your price.
You're going to pay your price for what you did, the damage. If you're at home or you're on a beach somewhere and you're smoking, what do you call them, joints, okay, or whatever, there should be no problem whatsoever. It's nobody's business except the person smoking the joint. To say that it is evil.
Now, I will counter that with this, okay? If you are employed by somebody and they say as part of the policy for working there, we don't want you smoking dope, we don't want you doing this, we don't want you doing that. Those are terms for your being employed here. I have no problem with that.
If you enter into a contract
because
and
you are
agree,
entering
yes.
freely into a contract with another business and you're saying, I'm not going to do thus and such while I'm working here. And I believe that they are free to randomly drug test you whenever you want. I worked at a paper mill for many years. That was part of the policy.
I would agree with you, Chase, if that included tobacco and alcohol.
Well, alcohol it did in the mill that I worked in. Tobacco, we were a tobacco-friendly mill, so that wasn't a contention.
Right, but I would agree. If we're going to say...
You might as well throw in coffee, too.
Well, in this state...
Coffee alters your state of mind. It actually does.
I agree 100%.
So do Twinkies, by the way.
In this state, we saw the light well enough to legalize marijuana and tax it.
There is nothing more potent in the human body than a low or high sugar base.
Okay, but I don't want
It
to get off
changes
point.
everything.
My point was simply
Right.
this. We have interjected the government into a situation which really should be between two private individuals or an individual and another entity. We've got marijuana legalized here in Washington State. They're about ready to legalize it in Oregon. It's legalized in Colorado.
And Alaska.
And Alaska. So the mill that I used to work at still has a very firm policy on drugs. If you get caught with a dirty UA for alcohol...
Now, why is that?
Or because we're using heavy equipment.
Right. You're using
And
equipment.
they do understand...
And you can hurt somebody.
That you could hurt somebody.
Yes and no, though. This is a double-edged sword. I worked on a project, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar project, where I became friends with a pipe fitter who took a vacation, 2 weeks off, and traveled up to Canada. Well, Canada at that time was a lot more lenient in marijuana than the United States. So he smoked a joint, came back to work. A week and a half after he had smoked the joint, he got injured. They handed him a cup. He tested positive. He was instantly fired and responsible for all his own medical costs. Now, he didn't smoke it at work. He didn't smoke it at home.
That.
He was in another damn country following their laws.
Right. That's just a loophole. Loopholes exist in our law, sadly.
My guess is that that's going to be exactly. I believe that will be one of those situations they're going to have to contend with, because if it's a legal substance, and while the THC may still register in your system, whether or not the psychotropic effects are present is a whole different matter, and that's going to have to be addressed, because what you're explaining is untenable unless there is some overlying agreement between the individual and the company that says absolutely nothing, it's a complete prohibition, and there are certain contracts that are written that way.
Yes.
My contention is this. I didn't have to go to work at this mill. It was my choice.
Exactly.
And I did sign it of my own free will. I remember the paperwork they put in front of me. I am not a drug user, so no big deal. I was UA'd many times there. Once after I actually bumped into something, and it was clean, and at least three random UAs, and it was always clean. Because I don't do drugs.
In my entire career, I turned down multiple offers for drugs. Whether I wanted to use it or not was irrelevant. The simple fact was I worked in an industry that I knew I was going to have to pee in a cup.
Right. The machine.
And so it was just simply...
The industry or the machine...
It wasn't worth the cost.
It's kind of like the dog, a police dog who's taught to take down a person who's running. Okay, they are taught to take down the person who's running. They don't differentiate. They're given the command. They go do what they're trained to do. I understand that. They don't have any way of thinking laterally. They just know what to do. They do their job. They're said, good boy, and that's it. Okay? And the same is with people, groups, businesses who look at the law and say that, for instance, marijuana, let's take marijuana, can affect your judgment at work. They don't know anything about chemicals.
So can your wife giving you a divorce paper.
Right. They don't know anything beyond the fact that this is what the law states, this is what the finding states, so we want less injuries at our plant, so therefore we'll adopt this and we'll enforce it with all of our strength. Now,
I think you're being a little too, and if you'll excuse me, naive. I've dealt with the drug enforcement policies at the mill, and it was far more involved than that. They actually had physicians, and they had risk management individuals who got involved with all of this.
The difference between drinking alcohol,
that was also forbidden,
but there's no way to tell if you do it off your own, on your own hours.
What they understood
if you have
is
a martini at night,
you are sober when you come into work, you're fine.
Right. When you say psychotropic effects, they don't understand what that is.
Nobody does. What they do, but within the larger community,
what I'm saying is they say
there's no policy.
Here's what they say. They say pee in a cup.
Yes.
And they're looking for a chemical.
Sure. They're looking
if
for
they
trace.
find the chemical, you're busted, right?
Yeah,
they have no idea what the chemical does or how it affects the human
it doesn't matter.
Body at all.
It's like a 5-strip
now we
water
do know,
test, and it just different colors mean different things.
One of the deadliest substances known to mankind is a Twinkie.
Well, that's the Dan White effect.
Right. Somebody ate a Twinkie and murdered somebody.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that's
okay. So what's the
that was the defense? I don't necessarily think.
Guess what? It worked.
It did work because he had a very good attorney.
Right. So what I'm saying is that when you take sugar and your blood sugar raises, the effect on your mind is very profound. The same as when you have low blood sugar.
Yeah, low blood sugar, you want to kill people.
And guess what? It's a more powerful effect than marijuana. But see, the watchdogs aren't taught to understand these concepts, and they know very little about brain biology.
See, it comes down to this. From an employer standpoint, they don't give a rat's ass.
Right.
Because it's about money.
Yeah, it's insurance charges. Like, the mills in town, you're not allowed to chew tobacco or smoke cigarettes anywhere on the mill. They just passed that.
Yeah, now.
Yeah, now. They just recently passed that. It's the same. Why? Because it lowers their insurance rates, because now people are less likely to have health issues and things like that. Well, so, you're right. It's about money. It doesn't really have to do with whether... they don't really think it through.
My point was simply this, that as a citizen, you have the latitude to say, I'm going to work for this person or I'm not going to work for this person. If I'm going to work for this person, then I will abide by whatever rules they're having. Right. Well, you don't have necessarily the option, if you're born in the United States of America, that option's not there. And so you have these draconian laws who are just destroying not just individuals, but destroying families. Well, you're with your buddies, you're caught with a joint, and you're the breadwinner. All of a sudden, you're fired. You're a felon. You can't earn money for your family anymore. Now you're on the public dole. Maybe you're going to wind up divorced. And there's this ripple effect that I know that the leadership is aware of, because they're doing it by
their social plan.
Design.
That's
and
their
we,
plan.
as the American public, are stooges.
Here's some of the interesting facts from 1980 to 2008, which even today is a long time ago. America's prison population quadrupled from 500,000 to 2.3 million.
And that's just incarceration. Right. That doesn't account for the people who are on paper, which is about 3 times the figure of incarceration.
Exactly.
And the paper, again, is parole or a supervised release.
Yes. And also today, the United States has roughly 5% of the world population and 25% of the world's prison population. And of that, the majority, if you go to the BOP site, Bureau of Prisons, you'll find the majority is drug possession offenses.
Right. Yeah, overwhelmingly. And the drug possession is marijuana.
If I remember right, it's like 55, 56%.
Whether you're a Christian, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, or whether you're an atheist, there's one thing that's for certain. The indigenous area in which you are born and raised, in which you grow up in, and you eat the produce from that particular area, the meats from that particular area, you're breathing the air from that area, you're drinking the water from that area. There are plants of medicinal purposes for that area that are designed to help you. I don't care if you're an evolutionist or a Christian. There are plants that are just, for instance, where did aspirin come from? Willow bark. Then we found a way to chemically make aspirin cheaper. That's why aspirin used to be very expensive. Now aspirin is just what? You can buy it for $1 for a nice big bottle of it. $1.50 maybe.
That has been one of my contentions on why marijuana has not been legalized in the United States yet, is we cannot make it.
Take a big hit.
We cannot make it yet. It's still one of nature's own.
It would dent big pharma.
Oh, it would. It would cripple them.
And it's not just that. There's also the other applications of the marijuana plant use. It can be used for clothing, for soap, for like ropes. I mean,
for newspaper. For newspaper.
It replaces all those industries if you legalize this, because people, not just for medical reasons, but now they say, hey, we can use this for other industry.
Now, let me go on my rant here. Get on my soapbox. Once again, we're talking specifically about marijuana. Why did it become illegal? Most American citizens do not know this. William Randolph Hearst is the reason marijuana is illegal. This one man made it illegal. How did he do it? He controlled 7 major newspapers when the day was newspaper print was the only means of news. And then, what did he do? He invested heavily into timber stock and timber holdings because he had newspaper and he needed paper. After he invested quite heavily, he found out something that horrified him. Hemp can grow faster and be refined to a better pulp, making a better quality paper at about 1/2 the cost
and you can
of
smoke
wood.
It when you're done reading the funnies.
So, what did he do? He started running op-ed pieces in every one of his major city newspapers on the dangers of marijuana. He ran this policy for 3 years, and his biggest rally cry was, if marijuana is legal, it will make white women want to sleep with black men. Now, as archaic as it sounds to us today, that horrified the political process. People called their senators, called their congressmen. You've got to stop this demon lettuce. It's going to destroy American society. 1938, marijuana became illegal. Did William Randolph Hearst benefit from it? You bet your ass he did. He made lots of money off of it. Yeah. So when we start talking about drugs, perhaps there are some drugs we need a total prohibition on. I wouldn't mind seeing a total prohibition on heroin. But here again, we run into the same problem we ran into the 1920s. When we make a prohibition for anything, the only thing we do is give street-level thugs that are willing to break the law a means to make a massive amount of money and make extreme power for themselves. Al Capone, before Prohibition was nothing more than a strong-arm bone breaker for a loan shark. That was all he did.
And Prohibition gave him the power that he needed.
And Prohibition made him
We've
rich.
Had Prohibition on drugs for decades now, and that's exactly what's happened.
Well, for the most part, since the CSA was implemented by Nixon. So
the only reason cartels are in existence is because of Prohibition.
All right, but here's the situation, okay? We are taking a Gatling gun, an Uzi, to the citizens of the United States. But we've got the back door, and for the most part, the front door.
North and south are both open.
We're letting these people just pour. Did you ever see that movie, the zombie movie? What was it called? Z with Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Oh, what was it? I forget the name of it. But
World War Z.
World War Z. Remember when they were pouring over the wall?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
That's our borders. The zombies are pouring over the wall, but we're taking a shotgun, a Gatling gun,
and shooting the guys trying to guard the wall.
But the people that they're supposed to be protecting behind the wall.
Yeah.
What the hell are we doing? Okay, and this is the point. The war on drugs is not a war on drugs. It's a war on people. It's a war on the peasants class.
It is.
That's how I see it. It has got to stop. The Los Zetas are a tool. They're a tool for our leaders. Otherwise, our border policies would be enforced, and they're not.
Well, when we talk about borders now, we get there's two schools of thought. There's the conservative and the liberal side of every argument.
The damn thing.
I agree.
Down.
Now the liberals will say, well, what about these people wanting to come over for this and that and whatever?
Dead rat's ass. Fix your own country first. Sadly, we are out of time for this episode. So, for
Jesse Wilson,
Mark Wilson,
and Lou Rogers,
I am Chase Rockwell saying so long until the next time you find yourself across the cosmos.
Send any questions or comments to us via email at info@acrossthecosmos.com. Also, visit us on the web at www.acrossthecosmos.com for show updates, news, and other important information. No part of this podcast may be used without the express written permission from the staff of Across the Cosmos. Across the Cosmos is a production of Omite Corporation. Copyright 2015.